Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Callie Waterhouse with the Arizona Association of Realtors, and we are thrilled that you have joined us on this Thursday morning at ODARC really early to talk about this open forum Q&A with some of the best minds in the industry. We are thrilled to welcome Michelle Lynn, CEO of AAR, Scott Drucker, our General Counsel here at Arizona Realtors, Jesi Wolnik, the attorney for the legal hotline. And we have a ton of questions for Jesi today. We have Laurie McDonnell, the president and designated broker for United Broker Group, and Casey Cyga, who is the managing broker for Realty One Scottsdale office, and Holly Eslinger, our owner broker for Exclusive Homes and Land. So welcome everyone this morning, and thank you for joining us. And we are just going to jump in. We have quite a few hundred people on today's webinar, and we want to make sure you get the most value for your time. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Lynn, who's going to open with some incredible opening remarks.
Wow, no pressure there. Good morning, everyone. Most of you are probably aware that my theme for this year has been a world without the Arizona Association of Realtors. And because we're going to be talking a lot about forms today, I'd just like you to imagine a world without the Arizona Association of Realtors. How would you get your contract forms? Each broker would have to draft their own forms. They would have to update their own forms. Their agents would have to read the boilerplate in each form because you wouldn't know it was changed. And then the designated broker on the review would have to read the boilerplate as well. But as you know, with the Arizona Realtors, we provide over 60 standardized forms, new and revised, that we introduce generally February 1st, June 1st, and October 1st. And Scott's going to give you an overview of the revised contract that is slated for release on February 1st. But also with a world without AAR, you would also have to pay for your forms delivery and your e-sign and your technology to accomplish your transactions. But with AAR, you have zip forms and you have e-sign as part of your member benefits. Zip forms is automatically updated every time a form is revised or released. But every month, outdated versions of the contract are used hundreds of times. The residential purchase contract was used, an old version of the residential purchase contract was used 1,256 times in just the last 3 months. So how does that happen? It happens because agents reuse transactions on zip forms. So please educate your agents not to reuse their zip form transactions and always create a new transaction. I'd also like to have you encourage your agents to learn to use Zip Forms MLS Connect. With MLS Connect, you can import data from any listing that's been listed on the MLS right into your Zip Forms library. That includes property address, tax information, broker's license number. And those instructions to utilize MLS are available under Business Services on aaronline.com. But a better way to learn this is to encourage your agents to take a zip form class. Zip forms is such an easy product to use that many people don't take a zip forms class and don't realize all the tools and tricks that they can utilize to make their transactions easier. Also, I don't know if anyone out there has noticed, but this is an election year. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, in a world without AAR, who would monitor the legislature and inform you on which of your representatives was best representing realtor interests. The Arizona Realtors focus on protecting realtors and homeowners alike, as well as electing real estate candidates to office. And Holly Eslinger, who's with us today, is the chair of the Legislative and Political Affairs Committee. And in her year, AAR actively monitored 166 of the 1,300 bills that were introduced last session. And AAR successfully passed bills prohibiting cities from restricting short-term rentals, except for health and safety reasons, and eliminated unfair restrictions on real estate licensees applying for a fingerprint clearance card. For the second year in a row, the association successfully defeated legislation brought forward by a for-profit institution of higher education to lower its property taxes at the expense of homeowners. One way we are so successful is by financially supporting candidates whose position on real estate regulation and a free market business environment most closely represent the initiatives of the Arizona Realtors. That is through the Realtors of Arizona Political Action Committee, RAPAC. The RAPAC trustees monitor the voting records of incumbents and have questionnaires for challengers. They meet together. They evaluate the candidates on Realtor Party issues only, and then they endorse candidates. This year, the Realtors of Arizona Political Action Committee has endorsed 74 candidates for the Arizona legislature in the general election. And we have a voter's guide on the website under Voice at the Capitol that you can take a look at before you fill out your ballot. We have traditionally had a 96% or higher successful endorsement rate, and we anticipate to maintain that record. So I'd ask for you to make sure that you all get out and vote on November 8th if you haven't voted already. And then finally, in a world without AAR, if you had problems with your technology, you'd have to have someone come and help you with that. Pay someone, the Geek Squad. But we have the tech helpline that is available for you and your agents for any kind of technology problem. We have our professional standards enforcement, arbitration, ombudsman, and mediation that can help you and your agents with disputes. We have classes and webinars like we're doing today, and of course we have risk management with the legal hotline with Jesi Wolnik that's here, and Rick Mack. So I think that it is clearly a better world with the Arizona Realtors. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Scott, who is going to talk a little bit about the much anticipated forms release in February.
Thanks, Michelle, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I've been asked to talk a little bit about AAR's ongoing efforts to revise the residential purchase contract and provide you with an update on where we are with that form. Many of you know that we actually began this process way back in January of this year. Specifically, we formed 3 sub-work groups, and each of the sub-work groups was charged with revising and making recommended changes to various sections of the purchase contract. They then passed those recommendations along to what we called the final work group. The final work group created a first draft of the revised purchase contract. That revised draft was then sent out to the loop. The loop consists of about 3,600 volunteers, members and industry partners who have been kind enough to, as I said, volunteer their time to help us review new and revised forms, and they provide feedback, comments to us. And in regard to the purchase contract, we received a lot of feedback, a lot of suggestions, and they were really helpful and beneficial. We then reconvened the final work group, and the final work group sat down over a span of, about 16 hours and reviewed each and every comment that came back to AAR, and they made a lot of changes. So that the draft that you may have seen that went out to the loop, the approved version of the contract is different than that, and somewhat significantly different based on the comments that we received. The draft of the purchase contract that was finalized by the work groups was approved by the Risk Management Committee on September 22nd. It was then approved by the Executive Committee on October 12th, but the Executive Committee did make a few minor changes to the form, which are currently being implemented by AAR's graphic designer. At this point, we expect the form will be released for educational purposes on November 15th. Now, understand that that is subject to change. It's not a firm date, but the date that we're shooting for is November 15th. And what that means is You will be able to see the form, some frequently asked questions, articles in The Voice. The Voice is AAR's weekly email newsletter. If you're not reading that every week, I strongly encourage you to do so because it contains a lot of good information. And again, our hope is on November 15th, you're going to see the new contract in The Voice. Ultimately, the new contract will be released for use on February 1st of 2017, meaning that it will not be available in our form platforms, zip form, .loop, until February of 2017. So even though we hope you will see the contract on November 15th, you won't be able to use the contract in transactions until February of 2017. Now, I'm not going to discuss each and every change to the contract with you, but we thought it would be good to highlight for you just a handful of some of the more impactful changes, and I picked out 5 that I thought were significant. The first is that for an all-cash sale, the contract is now going to require that a letter of credit or a source of funds from a financial institution be attached. And this is somewhat similar to the requirement that's already in the contract that you need to attach a pre-qualification letter when you're submitting a financed offer. So it's a similar requirement, but for an all-cash sale. Next, the seller's property disclosure statement will be required to be delivered within 3 days of contract acceptance. Currently, it's 5 days. That's going to be moved to 3 days. There is not going to be a change to the length of the inspection period. You probably have heard that the committee contemplated increasing the length of the inspection period to 15 days, but ultimately, based on the feedback that we received from members of the loop, they've elected to keep the inspection period at 10 days. Of course, the biggest change, and one that you've undoubtedly heard about, is that warranted items have been eliminated from the purchase contract, and as such, the premises will now be sold in its present physical condition. Another change that's been made to the contract is that clarifying language has been added to Section 6J, outlining what exactly happens when the buyer seeks to cancel the purchase contract but fails to identify items disapproved. There was some ambiguity there and some dispute, and so we took this opportunity to clarify that and explain precisely what happens in the event that you don't specifically identify items disapproved when you're seeking to cancel the purchase contract. And then finally, additional lines have been added to the purchase contract so that more than one buyer's agent, more than one seller's agent can be identified on the face of the contract. You know, we've had a number of requests for that, whether it's because you have multiple agents involved or you have a team leader that wants to be identified on the contract. Whatever the case may be, we've added lines to accommodate that. As you'd expect, AAR is going to be doing a lot of education in regard to the new purchase contract, and there's just 2 things that I want to mention, so maybe you can put them on your calendar. The first is that on November 17th, we're going to be holding a Train the Trainer webinar, similar to this webinar, and it's going to occur from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, so we're hoping that that will be just 2 days after the release of the form. Also on December 6th, we'll be holding an in-class Train the Trainer, so keep an eye out for more details in that regard. And then finally, I just want to mention that I would strongly encourage brokers to recommend to their agents that they take classes from instructors who've actually attended the Train the Trainer webinar or the in-class endeavor. Those instructors are going to have some very valuable insight into the purchase contract, and if your agents are going to be taking classes, I think it would be in everyone's best interest if they took classes from those instructors, and we will have a list published of those instructors on AAR's website, so that's something else to keep an eye out for. And at this point, I'm going to turn everything over to Jesi, who's going to talk to us about some lawsuits, trends, and how our agents are getting into trouble.
Thanks, Scott. Good morning. And I don't know if I should mention it here, but that contract sounds fabulous. I might be sitting around eating bonbons all day. The hotline may not ring. Let's hope that's not the case, or I may be out of a job. But that is a great change that's coming forward. I was asked to discuss possible flags or issues for potential lawsuits or violations. And so we do track those at our law firm. And again, probably the number one issue we face is those surrounding disclosures or a lack thereof. And so I can break it down. A lot of the potential issues for lawsuits deal with property condition. Often it's a lawsuit filed by a buyer after close of escrow. So the list we have, we start off with water issues. The first thing on my list is roof issues, leaking roof potentially that wasn't disclosed, or roof issues that were maybe repaired and wasn't disclosed. Similar, there's plumbing issues, plumbing that may have, again, either not been disclosed that there was an issue, or repairs that were done that were not disclosed. There are lawsuits regarding floodplains, properties sitting in washes. These are all issues that should be disclosed, and of course mold. Next on the list after water issues would be Schedule B documents. Schedule B documents, the way you can avoid this is, of course, looking at the Schedule B and looking to see if there are any issues. One item that I've talked about before in some of my classes that I hold are the possibility of researching Schedule B items. And again, you should encourage your buyer to do their due diligence as well, but there are websites where you can type in a map on a website and it'll pull up any issues that may be on the Schedule B documents, and that is a helpful tool. Third item on my list would be permits. An individual who made an addition or some remodeling and they didn't obtain the permits that were required, and then they failed to disclose that. Of course, you can go on to the Legal Hotline archives or go to AAR's website, AAR Online, and type in handyman exemption. That is a great resource where you can learn about the rules required per the ARS statutes for repairs, which of course would be any repairs that are done at a property, including materials, etc., that are totaling $1,000 or more in an aggregate, do require a licensed contractor to perform that. And there is an additional statute that says if remodeling or repairs done are done for the purpose of sale, that the contractors, if it's done by the homeowner that has coordinated those repairs and remodel, then the contractor's name and license number does have to be disclosed in all sales documents. So do make sure that you educate your agents regarding permits and any repair or remodel. Fourth item on my list would be expansive soils. Be aware, again, the ADRE website is a phenomenal resource. There are many tools there for you, as well as links from the buyer advisory. There are a lot of maps out there to help educate your buyer, and again, encouraging your agent to be the source of the source. We know that's a key term for the brokers out there. Have your agents be the source of the source. Make sure they are educating their buyers where to go to find those resources. And again, the ADRE website does have very helpful maps that you can use for those tools. And then the last item on my list would be the disclosure of termites and or scorpions. We know that we are required by law to follow a standard of care, and you have to recall that we must encourage our sellers to disclose all known material facts. Of course, again, if you search on AAR's website, there is a seminal case that we always cite, which is Hill v. Jones, which is a case from 1986 that says a seller must disclose known material facts. And I do know it was a question that was coming up, I think potentially from a broker, but I was also, of course, going to mention that a real estate licensee must disclose known material facts relating to the property to a potential buyer as well, which is both in the Commissioner's Rules, which is R4-28-1101, or of course, again, the famous case that we cite frequently, Aranki v. RKP Investments, and that's a case from 1999. So if you are aware of a known material fact, if you are aware of an issue that would affect what a buyer is willing to pay for a property, you must make those disclosures. And so again, it's just a matter of educating your agents to make sure they know that is the requirement.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jesi. And for everyone who's just joining us a little bit late, Jesi Wolnik is the attorney for the Arizona Legal Hotline. And the website that she mentioned is actually aaronline.com. You can visit our website, type in your information, And you do have to be logged into our website to access all of the legal hotline archives, just so you know. All right, so in front of you is a question box. We would welcome your questions at this time. We do have quite a few questions that you were kind enough to send to us ahead of time to help us better prepare for today's webinar. So we're just going to jump right in and go ahead and write your questions in the, yes, Jesi is amazing.
Thank you.
That is a great way to start the webinar.
Now, was that a question or a statement?
No. Looking at all those exclamation points, we're going to go with wow. Okay, so we're going to jump in. We have Laurie McDonnell and Casey Cyga and Holly Eslinger here as well. So we do welcome your brokerage questions. And just so everyone knows, these are brokers that are on the webinar today. So these are specific to your peers. So the first question that we are going to tackle, and we had a ton of questions regarding agency. So we're going to jump in with the really exciting stuff. And let's talk about dual agency. Holly, do you want to kick that one off? How do you feel about it?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. As a broker, I'm really not in favor of dual agency because the problem with dual agency is the fiduciary responsibilities that we have under a single agency really go away. And there is more liability for my agents as well as myself as the broker. So I really discourage dual agency. Now, I do know that we've had this discussion in office meetings about, well, what if I'm sitting in open house and what if a buyer, an unrepresented buyer comes in? Am I in a dual agency situation? And if my agent begins to work with that buyer, yes, they are in a dual agency situation. So, if that happens, they have to disclose. It has to be in writing, and they have to use the form that's on Zip Forms called limited representation. Oops, Scott.
Consent to limited representation.
No, hang on for 1 second. We're going to give you the exact.
Consent to limited representation.
It's, consent to limited representation. Thank you so much, Jesi.
Okay. And then how do you handle seller agency when representing a buyer in a FSBO?
There's two ways that you can handle that. First of all, you want to disclose if you have the buyer and it is a FSBO, you can use the consent for unlimited representation for the seller so that you get paid, or you could actually list the seller as well as handle the buyer. So you can handle that two ways. And really, it's if you're going to do that, talk to your brokers first. Make sure that they agree that it's okay for you to do that. Okay.
Okay. So perfect segue leading into disclosure. Okay. So the first question up is regarding brokerage liability. The seller did not disclose everything they knew to the listing agent. What would be the brokerage liability for the lack of disclosure?
Well, you can't be held to something that you don't know, that they haven't disclosed. So it would fall back on the seller.
And that's assuming, though, that it wasn't something that the agent, observed. For example, you have if the seller doesn't disclose that the roof leaks, but you walk into the house and the listing agent can see stains on the ceiling, the listing agent now has a duty to ask the seller and pass that along to the buyer. So ignorance is not always bliss when you're dealing with those situations. So you can't consciously ignore something obvious even if the seller hasn't disclosed it.
So we'll go on to what we talked about a little bit earlier. Are texts from an agent considered written notice regarding any particular issue or situation?
I would say that the answer to that is no. And if you take a look at the purchase contract in Section 8, it very clearly defines what notice is. And it talks about has to be in writing, and it's deemed delivered and received when it's either hand-delivered, sent via fax, sent via email, or sent by recognized overnight courier service. So I don't think that a text message would fall into any of those categories. And so I would be inclined to answer that question with a no.
I would agree with Scott. Certainly under the contract, that would not be a proper notice. But people need to be very cautious with their text. As you know, you can easily document those texts. They don't go away, and sometimes they can turn into an exhibit in a lawsuit. So I would be very cautious on what you're texting back and forth.
And not just a lawsuit. I can't remember the last time we had an ethics complaint come in that didn't have at least one text message screenshotted, with an attachment. So it's certainly something to be aware of.
Okay, so this member, Christine, is looking for clarification, and I'll read this a couple of times just to make sure I get it correct. So the seller's agent tells me that he is not obligated because the highest and best time has passed, but no offer had been accepted. The buyer would have offered more if he was made aware that there were multiple offers. Period. Sorry. So the seller's agent tells me he is not obligated because the highest and best time passed, but no offers had been made. So Christine, I'm not really sure what your question is.
I don't understand.
You're seeking clarification, but if you could maybe update that a little bit and ask a question, we'll come back to it.
Or even if I can, I think if she's saying that she would have made a higher offer, but the seller's time frame for call of highest and best offers has passed, and now the seller's making the decision. I mean, unless the agent has in writing from the seller not to present any more offers, I think they still would have been required to submit an offer that would have come in.
And a seller is certainly able to accept an offer if they choose to do so. They don't have to give everybody an opportunity to submit a highest and best offer. If there's an offer that's submitted and it's one that is acceptable to them, they are certainly free to go ahead and accept that offer without giving necessarily other parties an opportunity to submit higher offers if that's what they choose to do.
And then the next question is, what's the best way to handle cash or credit in lieu of repairs? This one comes up quite a bit.
Cash, oh wow. Okay, so in the BINSR, it needs to always have disapproved items, and I think if in the BINSR, if it's out of the gate asking for a reduction or a credit in lieu of repairs, that's renegotiating the contract, and that's not the purpose of the BINSR. Certainly, I think if you list the disapproved items and below that suggest that they would consider a repair, or a credit in lieu of the repair, that would be acceptable. That gives the seller the option to still correct the disapproved items without having to necessarily just only give a credit.
And I think, cash or a credit in lieu of repairs is incredibly risky way to handle a transaction, because we've had multiple circumstances where they give a credit and then after close of escrow the repair is a lot more extensive and expensive than the credit, and then you have a dispute. So if you're going to do that, Holly, Casey, wouldn't you think that you would want to get a couple of bids, have a licensed contractor come in, make sure that you had a good handle on what the repair was and what the cost would be?
Yes.
And I would just say addendum. Use an addendum, right? If you're going to be changing the terms of the contract, changing the price, anything other than noting repairs, use an addendum. The BINSR is not an addendum. Its purpose is not to modify the terms of the purchase contract. That's why we always say don't negotiate purchase price on the BINSR. Use an addendum.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that could be a potential problem when you are when you're negotiating this, you really need to involve the lender, because that's going to show on the settlement sheet, no longer the HUD, but the settlement sheet. And the biggest problem that I'm seeing right now is that when the agents change the wording and say, and this is what most of them do, they say like $1,000 to be used towards buyer's closing costs. That the problem with that is the lender may be okay with it, but then when you come down to closing, you may have $1,000 towards closing costs, but none of the repairs are done. So allows the buyer an opportunity to be able to come back to the seller and say, hey, this doesn't say $1,000 to repair anything. It says closing costs, so I want to use it for closing costs. So there's there's an opportunity for misunderstanding to happen right at the end of the contract.
And if I can really fast, I think that is really key. If you've ever spoken with me on the hotline, I always say it always comes down to communication. Don't guess at what the other party is going to do. Clearly communicate. And so, of course, we've had those calls where money in lieu of repairs was negotiated, and then there was a misunderstanding. One party was negotiating only for non-warranted repairs, and the other was negotiating for all repairs. And so you need to communicate what exactly you're negotiating.
Great. So that's another great segue for the next question, Jesi. What is the number one thing that consumers are suing agents for in 2016?
Well, right, that was my list. Disclosure. And I guess when we have a matter that we're defending a broker, if it's broker specific, usually they're suing under standard of care, which is a form of negligence. So document everything. Again, if you speak with me on the hotline, the one thing I always tell you as far as risk management is not only do you have that conversation with the listing agent or the buyer's agent or the buyer or the seller, but then follow up with an email that says this is just to confirm what we've just spoken about. Make sure you're documenting every step of the way, because if unfortunately you ever need the services of an attorney, the first thing they want to know is what's in your file, what emails can you share to show that you followed the standard of care.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we do have a webinar coming up next week on criminals, crime, and the new HUD guidelines. So for all these questions regarding the new sex offender out, as we call it, I'm going to encourage you to join us on the 26th with Mike Mumford as we cover the new HUD guidelines, and we're going to kind of skip over those. Please know that we will address these questions next week. They are very important, but we have a ton of questions. So we have a webinar specifically to answer all of those questions, unless you really want to touch on it. Okay, great. So we're going to move on. Let's talk about procuring cause. Buyers of agents going through resale open houses without an agent, and how can they cause issues with procuring cause?
Oh, God, that's a great one. I have them going on all the time. You know, is the agent educating their clients when they go into an open house, you know, what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, and they need to call and take their agent with them. I've had them where agents have gone in, have said they had an agent that they're working with. There wasn't a problem. Then is what has happened is the client that went into that open house decided to call that listing agent. So now they're getting information from the other agent, not working with their agent, and before you know it, we're procuring cause. Oh, no, wait a minute. I showed the house. They came back to me, but they're my client. I sent them over. Well, you never showed the property. So I think it's educating the agents need to educate their client and you know, be honest of what we're doing. If we have an agent, if we don't have an agent, so it's education. We need to make them aware. And especially another thing on that, going into new homes. I have agents say, oh, God, my client just went into a new home. I'm not going to get paid, and the builder's not going to pay me. Also, let them know I need to be with you. And when you're looking for properties for your clients, not only the resale, but also the new. Take them in. Show them all those right up front.
If I can add really fast, on the hotline, we don't cover procuring cause issues. We refer those all to AAR. But if I can make a plug for Michelle Lynn, she has a fabulous definition of procuring cause in her book, A Real Estate Guide, A Practitioner's Guide to Real Estate. Sorry,
it's a snappy title.
I just call it Michelle Lynn's Real Estate Book. And it has a great definition in there of procuring cause that I think is very helpful. And so I'll usually direct anybody that calls in to look at her definition in the book and then call AAR.
Yeah, I would also like to say, from a broker's perspective, you really do need to train your agents who are going to be holding open houses on what to ask, because the educational process goes in many directions. And the biggest one is the agent that's sitting on an open house thinking that they've just picked up a buyer, only to find out later on after they've shown properties that that buyer is actually working with another agent. Mm-hmm. So we as brokers really need to teach them what to ask.
Absolutely. So it comes down to education, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the timeline a little bit. We've had some changes in the timeline, and it seems like people still have questions. So let's start with When does the clock start? The evening the document is emailed, or the next morning when the document is read?
If I'm giving you, say, the Binzer today, it starts at 12:01 tomorrow morning. So your first day starts tomorrow, okay? Everybody thinks, oh, it started right now. No, it's the day after.
And it is in the contract, the calculating time period is in Section 8 of the contract. So whenever you have a question like that on any of the time periods, the first thing that you should always do is just go to the contract and read the language. Many times when people ask me questions, I never answer a question without going to the contract and reading the language, because sometimes I even, as much as I've used the contract, will forget exactly what it says. So always, as brokers, when your agents come, get out the contract and make them read that language and read it with them, and 9 times out of 10 you'll get it clarified.
Good advice.
Sounds like that would be a great start for like the onboarding process, is to hand the brand new agent a copy of the contract, sit down with them, and go through it line by line. And Casey, you do a lot of mentoring and helping with your new agents. Do you incorporate that type of education?
The thing we have training classes that we have, but within our offices of the new agents that we're hiring, I have a sheet to where I get them onto zip forms, get them into our system, get the orientation of all that takes place. Then I also have within there, they want to write contracts and they want to write listings. To train new agents, I find that it's interesting because the personalities are all different. So you've got to be able to read the new agent. How fast do they want to go? How slow do they go? Do they pick up? Are they visual? Do they have to read? Are they good with instructions and just telling them what to do? So I try to zone in on their personality and how quickly they go. I also let them know right up front that call me. We have one-on-one coaching. We'll spend a half hour, an hour, whatever it is. Once you go through this, I have them get into zip forms and start looking at all the different forms that are in there. Highlight things that they don't understand. So when we're doing the one-on-one coaching, we can do that. Also, I found that what's really been effective for me is doing it in groups. Like twice a month, I'll have all my new people in a group. They come into the room. I ask each one, what questions do you have today? I put them all on the board. We go around the room, and then we discuss them. And it's interesting what comes up in that classroom. And everybody says, so I didn't know that, or this is good. So we're kind of hitting a lot of issues in one group. So that seems to work for me. And then encouraging the agents, when they make a mistake, it'll be okay. Let's talk about this. What could you have done better? What could you have done? So staying positive with new agents and encouraging them that they can do this.
Excellent. I think also taking the GRI contract class is an excellent option as well. So Scott, we have a question specifically for you. And did you say the new contract will consider all properties to be sold in as is, or just warranted items are going away?
Well, both. I think it's somewhat one and the same. The verbiage, we don't actually use the phrase as is in the new purchase contract. The way it's worded is that the premises will be sold in its present physical condition. Now, can repairs be requested? Yes, the parties can certainly negotiate repairs. Buyer can ask for repairs. Seller can agree to make repairs. The contract will still operate the same in that regard, but there will be no warranted items, no mandatory repairs of warranted items.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to go talk about, do you want to talk about warranted items? We had a lot of questions.
If I can, right?
Yeah.
So I do have this 1-hour presentation. I come out and talk to folks about the top 10 legal hotline issues and how to avoid those issues. And of course, I discuss a lot about warranted items. And the one piece of advice I would give regarding warranted items to help coach newer agents, or maybe agents who've maybe not heard this before, would be, with our current contract, your listing agent should be having a conversation with the seller at the time of listing before a contract comes in. And if you basically say to the seller, here are the listing documents, and if you can just fill out a blank check for me right now and sign it, I would appreciate it. And watch their face turn white and ask what you're talking about. Well, in essence, that's what you're asking with warranted repairs. We don't know what that cost is going to be. So make sure your seller knows that right now. You need to be aware that this warranted section, we have to address it, and you've said yes right now.
Scott, did you want to add in?
I agree with Jesi.
Okay, so with the new contract, will there be an as-is space to write that in, or will it be an addendum?
Well, we don't have to, because the contract will essentially be as is, so we won't have to add any language to turn it into as is. If you use the contract without making any modifications, the property will be sold in its present physical condition without any warranties.
And will there be a definition coming out about present and physical condition? I know people will probably be asking for clarification of what that means.
Yes, we will be doing a lot of education in regard to the new terms in the purchase contract with frequently asked questions and articles, and that's something that we'll work through with members as we roll the contract out.
I think it also will increase the importance of the seller's property disclosure statement. We'll need to make sure that the sellers disclose right away what is not working on the property. So just because the warranties are going to go away, I think it's important for you to stress to your agents that doesn't eliminate the issue of the HVAC that doesn't work, or plumbing issues. It doesn't take that away. It just puts that into negotiation, and it makes the disclosure up front of any non-working items in the property all the more important, because then you can establish that was what was the then present physical condition of the property.
Yeah, and it has to remain the same from the time of contract acceptance to the time of close of escrow, even if it's, even without warranted items, even changing it to essentially as is, the property still has to be in the same condition at close of escrow as it was upon contract acceptance. Nothing's changing in that regard.
Which is just what I was going to add, Section 4E, which I'm not sure if that number changes, but right now the current contract 4E is changes. So if there's any change during escrow, the seller still would be required to make that disclosure, and that is considered an update of the SPUD. So that hasn't changed as well.
Yeah, and that will be Section 4F in the new contract.
Okay. Wow, that is a long question. I'm going to go back up to this one real quick. When using our current contract, how do you handle when a buyer's agent puts the wrong stuff in the wrong place regarding the warranted items on the Binzer? How do you handle that? What's the best way to make this right?
I've never heard of that happening. But
So that happens quite frequently, actually. I believe that regardless of whether the warranted items are on page 2 or on page 1, they are only required to give notice of those items, and if they are on page 1, I think they have given that notice regardless, so they are considered warranted whether they're on page 1 or 2.
And when that happens, also communication. Help each other out. If you receive a Binzer and they put it in the wrong place, you might nicely communicate with the other person and the other agent and let them know, okay, I got the notice, I understand that, but this is a warranted item, so it really should be there, and not get adversarial with them, but help educate them, help educate each other, because your ultimate goal is to have a happy buyer and a happy seller and close the transaction, so eliminating those ambiguities and have good communication will go a long way in accomplishing that goal.
Well, thank you very much. We just have a couple of minutes left in today's webinar. Jesi, one of the questions that keeps coming through is, you are with the legal hotline. How do people reach you? What's the process like when they want to call you? What do they need to pick up the phone and reach out to you?
Well, it's pretty simple. You do have to be a designated broker or a managing broker, and you just contact AAR, let them know you need to sign up for the legal hotline. It's a very fast process, and that's it. For those of you who know, the legal hotline number is 1-800-533-9294. When you call, good chance you'll get me on the other end of that line. You have to have your NRDS number so I can verify that you are signed up for the hotline. As long as you've got that number, or send me chocolate, I'll waive that. No, just I don't actually like chocolate. But as long as you have your NRDS number, we're good, and I can answer your question.
That's great. And Mark, that is a great question. I'm going to forward your question to Scott for him to answer because I want to make sure that we do it justice, and I don't want to get it incorrect. So, Scott, I will forward Mark's question over to you. Any closing remarks about solar panels? What are you saying, Laurie?
Well, solar continues to be a challenge for sure. We're running into issues, at least solar, obviously, and with lending, the issues there, as well as just the lease being available, all kinds of different things. So I'm having my agents write contingencies in offers that within the inspection period that they are, the buyers are getting qualified for the lease so that, and getting all the information they need. And also that there's a transfer made of the lease at the time of closing. But yeah, I see solar as being something that's going to be an ongoing issue.
And we've received at AAR a lot of requests in regard to the purchase contract that we clarify, add clarifying language in regard to the transfer of solar leases. Now, I will say that in the new contract, they did add clarity to fixtures and leased items, but they may not have addressed leased solar to the extent that the members want. And so what we're going to be doing is, the beginning of next year, we're going to be forming a work group to look into that issue. And I expect that work group is going to do one of two things. Either they're going to draft an entirely new form, which would be a solar lease addendum, or they're going to add language to the additional clause addendum addressing solar leases. So know that is something we're aware of, and it's something that we will be working on, and we'll have some resources out to you sometime early next year.
And we also have 2 webinars on our website dealing with solar, what realtors need to know when working with sellers and what realtors need to know working with buyers, specifically with solar. So you can go to aaronline.com and type in webinars, and we've got 2 of them there, very recent ones with Liz Recchia to handle. If you were a little bit late joining us, I just want to recap some of the dates that Scott Drucker shared with us earlier regarding the new contract. Mark your calendar for November 15th. This is when the new contract will be available for educational purposes. So we're going to start some classes. The new contract, the residential purchase contract, will actually be released in February 2017, so a few months away. On November 17th, we'll be having a Train the Trainer webinar from 1 to 3 p.m. And for attending today, I will set that up and send you the link so you'll be the first to know. And then on December 6th, we'll be having in-class Train the Trainer. Correct?
Yep, those are the dates that Barb Freestone has laid out for us.
Absolutely. And the link that Jesi mentioned earlier regarding the handyman exemption is aaronline.com. You'll need to log into our website and click on the Legal Hotline Archives.
Or at the top, there's the white search bar, and you can just simply type in handyman exemption, and it will pull up articles for you.
Sounds great. So we just have a couple minutes left. Michelle, closing remarks.
I guess as a closing remark, I would just again encourage the brokers to communicate with their agents, to encourage them to get the education on the new contract, to encourage them to get education again on zip forms and how to use zip forms so that we can eliminate the problem of outdated forms being used in our transaction. Also to educate their agents, or to try to encourage them to communicate better with the other agent and try not to be immediately adversarial when an issue arises. Because when your agents get adversarial with each other, and especially if they convey that to their clients, now their clients are adversarial with the other side, and that just leads to more possibility for disputes and claims during the transaction. So again, work with your agents on those educational issues and on communication.
Thank you. Scott, any closing remarks?
I would just say that change is hard, right? We know that change is hard, but I think that the changes to the purchase contract are beneficial, and I think that over time you'll get used to them and appreciate them. So keep an open mind when you're taking a look at the new purchase contract. Embrace it, and know that members put a lot of time, effort, hard work into it, and I think that over the long run it's going to be something that everybody will look at very positively.
Sounds great. Well, thank you. Everyone, thank you so very much for joining us today, and we appreciate your feedback. please know that we probably had 300 questions come in, so if we were not able to address your question today, I will be creating a spreadsheet of all the questions and forwarding them over to Scott and his team. You should see the expression on Scott's face.
He's excited. He is like, he is so pumped up.
Just to be clear, I will not be responding directly to 300 questions.
But, however, I will let you know that with the spreadsheet, what we can do is create more webinars answering those questions topically specific. So we can definitely do that as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Jesi and Laurie and Casey and Holly. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michelle and Scott, as always. And folks, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you have a great day. And yes, today's webinar was recorded and will be available on our website within the next few days. Thank you very much and have a great day.